Now, here's an important point to keep in mind as we discuss these questions about race. People can think and talk about things that belong to a category C despite being confused in various ways about C. So, for example, Anaxagoras, who lived in Athens about 2,500 years ago, thought that the sun and stars were fiery stones. And Ptolemy, who lived in Alexandria in Egypt, thought that the stars were fixed to the celestial sphere centered on the earth. Both Anaxagoras and Ptolemy thought and talked about existing things, stars, despite being seriously mistaken about what stars were. So if Anaxagoras says, there are stars, and stars are fiery stones, he's right on the first count, there really are stars, but wrong on the second count. He was seriously mistaken about the nature of stars. However, here there seems to be a contrast with mermaids and manatees. So if we imagine Columbus saying, there are mermaids, and mermaids are half women, half fish, the verdict is quite different. Columbus is wrong on the first count. It's not that he's right on the first count, that there are mermaids, but wrong on the second count, because in fact, mermaids are manatees. So what's the difference between the mermaids manatees case and the example of Anaxagoras thinking that the stars are fiery stones? That is a question for you. The reason why this is relevant is that someone like Appiah thinks that the category Asian is more like the category mermaid than it is like the category star. There is no doubt plenty of confusion about the category Asian. Maybe some people think that to be Asian, you need to have some special Asian genes. That is false. But does that mean that we should treat the category Asian like the category mermaid and say that in fact there are no Asians, that it was just an illusion that there were Asians to begin with? Or should, alternatively, we treat the category Asian like the category star? Okay, there are stars, but they're quite unlike what we thought they were. And there's certainly no shortage of confusion around the topic of race. Let me end by discussing a couple of them. So suppose that there are genetic differences, perhaps significant, between the A's and the B's. It is tempting to conclude that the categories A and B are biological categories, or that they're not social categories. That is a mistake. Here's an example. Let A be the category of people whose first name is Emily, and B be the category of people whose first name is Jacob. There will be significant genetic differences between the A's and the B's. Of course, the vast majority of the B's and hardly any A's will have a Y chromosome. But A and B are social categories, and they're not, in any intuitive sense, biological ones. And here is the converse confusion. Suppose that the genetic differences between the A's and the B's are insignificant or non-existent. It can be tempting to conclude that the categories A and B are not biological. That is also a mistake. So, for example, at least in theory, members of different clades could be genetically identical. So a clade, or a monophyletic group, is a group of organisms that consists of a common ancestor and all its descendants. So, as As you can see from this diagram, the crocodiles and the birds form a monophyletic group. Monophyletic groups, or clades, are biological categories, if any categories are, and in practice, members of different clades will differ genetically, but that's not guaranteed. You could have two clades A and B, and the genetic differences between the A's and the B's could be either insignificant or at the extreme non-existent. So, in other words, don't get too hung up in these discussions on genes. That's it for lectures for this week. We'll continue with Appiah and Spencer on Monday, and also start looking at Sally Haslanger's paper, so do read that for Monday. A quiz will be distributed next week. And this week I should have my interview with Anthony Appiah up. One more week to go before Thanksgiving. I'll see you next time.